Question 1. An organization is deploying a comprehensive mobile device management (MDM) solution to govern the use of both corporate-issued and employee-owned devices accessing sensitive corporate data in alignment with potential requirements from regulations like the California Consumer Privacy Act (CCPA). The MDM aims to enforce security policies, manage applications, and protect data in transit and at rest. During the risk assessment phase, which of the following activities is most critical for establishing a baseline understanding of the potential adverse effects on the organization's objectives due to compromised mobile devices? Option A. Developing detailed technical specifications for the MDM software, including encryption algorithms and authentication protocols, to ensure compliance with industry best practices. Option B. Performing penetration testing on the MDM infrastructure to identify exploitable vulnerabilities in the management console and device enrollment processes. Option C. Conducting extensive user training sessions on mobile device security awareness and the proper use of the MDM solution to minimize human error. Option D. Quantifying the potential financial loss and reputational damage associated with data breaches originating from mobile devices, alongside estimating the probability of such breaches occurring based on current threat intelligence and control effectiveness. The correct answer is D. Quantifying the potential financial loss and reputational damage associated with data breaches originating from mobile devices, alongside estimating the probability of such breaches occurring based on current threat intelligence and control effectiveness. Explanation. The scenario describes a situation where an organization is implementing a mobile device management (MDM) solution to enhance information security, particularly in the context of remote work and BYOD, bring your own device policies. ISO 27005/2018 emphasizes a systematic approach to risk management, which includes identifying, assessing, treating, and monitoring risks. In the context of MDM, understanding the potential impact on business operations and the likelihood of adverse events is crucial for effective risk treatment. The core of risk assessment involves determining the level of risk by considering the magnitude of harm and the probability of that harm occurring. When evaluating an MDM solution, the organization must consider various threats and vulnerabilities that could compromise the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information processed on mobile devices. These could include unauthorized access, malware, data leakage, or loss of devices. The impact of such events can range from minor financial loss to severe reputational damage and legal noncompliance. For instance, with data protection regulations like GDPR or CCPA, the likelihood is influenced by factors such as the security controls implemented, user awareness, and the sophistication of potential attackers. Therefore, a comprehensive risk assessment for MDM would involve analyzing the potential impact of identified threats on business objectives and estimating the probability of these threats materializing, often using qualitative or quantitative scales. This process directly informs the selection and implementation of appropriate risk treatment options, such as encryption, remote wipe capabilities, access controls, and regular security audits, to reduce the identified risks to an acceptable level. The question tests the understanding of how the fundamental principles of risk assessment, as outlined in ISO 27005, apply to the specific domain of mobile device management. It requires recognizing that the assessment of impact and likelihood are the foundational elements for determining the overall risk level, which then guides the subsequent risk treatment decisions. Question 2. Consider an organization that processes sensitive health information, subject to stringent regulations like HIPAA. The organization is evaluating the value of its electronic health record, (EHR) system. Which of the following approaches most accurately reflects the ISO 27005/2018 guidance for determining the value of this information asset in the context of risk assessment? Option A. Determining the number of patient records stored in the system and multiplying it by a nominal per record value assigned for archival purposes. Option B. Estimating the market value of the EHR software licenses and the annual maintenance costs associated with the system. Option C. Quantifying the potential financial loss from a data breach, the cost of regulatory fines for noncompliance with HIPAA, and the estimated impact on patient care continuity due to system unavailability. Option D. Calculating the average salary of the IT personnel responsible for maintaining the EHR system and the cost of their training. The correct answer is C. Quantifying the potential financial loss from a data breach, the cost of regulatory fines for noncompliance with HIPAA, and the estimated impact on patient care continuity due to system unavailability. Explanation. The process of determining the value of information assets is a crucial preliminary step in risk assessment, according to ISO 27005/2018. This value is not a monetary figure in isolation, but rather a reflection of the asset's importance to the organization, considering its impact on business objectives if its confidentiality, integrity, or availability is compromised. When assessing the value, organizations should consider the potential consequences of a security incident. For instance, a breach of confidential customer data could lead to significant financial penalties under regulations like the GDPR, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Similarly, the disruption of a critical operational system affecting availability could halt production, leading to substantial revenue loss and contractual breaches. The integrity of financial records is paramount. Their corruption could result in incorrect financial reporting, regulatory noncompliance, and severe financial misstatements. Therefore, the value is determined by the potential impact on the organization's ability to meet its objectives, which encompasses legal, financial, operational, and reputational aspects. This value is then used to prioritize risk treatment actions, ensuring that the most critical assets receive the most robust protection. The selection of appropriate risk treatment options is guided by the identified value of the asset and the potential impact of threats exploiting vulnerabilities. Question 3. An organization, subject to the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, discovers through its regular vulnerability scanning program that a critical server, responsible for processing sensitive customer financial transactions, exhibits a high-severity vulnerability, CVE 2023-XXXX, that could lead to unauthorized data disclosure. What is the most appropriate immediate risk treatment action to take in accordance with ISO 27005/2018 principles? Option A. Engage a third-party cybersecurity firm to conduct a comprehensive penetration test of the affected server. Option B. Document the vulnerability in the risk register and await the next scheduled risk review cycle. Option C. Conduct a follow-up vulnerability scan immediately after the initial discovery to confirm the finding. Option D. Implement the necessary patches or configuration changes to mitigate the identified vulnerability. The correct answer is D. Implement the necessary patches or configuration changes to mitigate the identified vulnerability. Explanation. The scenario describes a situation where a vulnerability scanner has identified a high-severity vulnerability, CVE 2023-XXXX, on a critical server hosting sensitive financial data. The organization operates under regulations like GDPR and PCI DSS, which mandate timely remediation of such risks. ISO 27005/2018 emphasizes the iterative nature of risk management, including the identification, assessment, and treatment of risks. When a significant vulnerability is discovered, the immediate response should align with the established risk treatment plan. In this context, the most appropriate action is to prioritize the remediation of the identified vulnerability. This involves applying patches, configuration changes, or implementing compensating controls to reduce the likelihood or impact of the vulnerability being exploited. Simply rescanning without addressing the root cause does not mitigate the risk. Documenting the vulnerability is a necessary step, but not the primary risk treatment action. Engaging external consultants might be part of the remediation process, but is not the immediate, direct action to treat the risk itself. Therefore, the most direct and effective step according to risk management principles is to implement the necessary controls to mitigate the vulnerability. Question 4. Consider an organization that has implemented a multi-factor authentication, MFA solution for remote access to its sensitive customer data repository. An independent security audit reveals that while the MFA mechanism itself is robust, the process for onboarding new users and issuing secondary authentication factors is manual, time-consuming, and lacks rigorous verification of user identity during the issuance phase. This process is managed by the IT support team, which has limited security training. Based on ISO 27005/2018 principles for vulnerability identification, which of the following best describes a vulnerability arising from this scenario? Option A. The time-consuming nature of the onboarding process itself is a direct vulnerability, as it may lead to user frustration and bypassing of security measures. Option B. The manual user onboarding and factor issuance process, due to its lack of rigorous identity verification and limited security awareness of the IT support team, presents a vulnerability that could be exploited to gain unauthorized access to secondary authentication factors. Option C. The reliance on an external IT support team for onboarding introduces a supply chain vulnerability that cannot be addressed by internal controls. Option D. The inherent complexity of multi-factor authentication systems creates a vulnerability, irrespective of the implementation details. The correct answer is B. The manual user onboarding and factor issuance process, due to its lack of rigorous identity verification and limited security awareness of the IT support team, presents a vulnerability that could be exploited to gain unauthorized access to secondary authentication factors. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 27005/2018 in identifying vulnerabilities lies in a comprehensive, systematic approach that considers the interplay between threats, assets, and existing controls. When assessing the effectiveness of a control, particularly in the context of mitigating a specific threat to an asset, the focus should be on whether the control, as implemented and operated, creates new weaknesses or fails to address the root cause of the vulnerability. For instance, a technical control designed to prevent unauthorized access might, if misconfigured or poorly managed, inadvertently expose a different pathway for attack or create an operational dependency that itself becomes a vulnerability. Similarly, a procedural control like a complex access request process might be bypassed through social engineering or simply not enforced, thereby failing to mitigate the intended vulnerability. The identification process, as outlined in ISO 27005, requires not just listing potential weaknesses, but understanding their context within the risk scenario, considering how they can be exploited by threats, and how they interact with other components of the information security management system. This means evaluating controls not in isolation, but as part of the overall defense-in-depth strategy. A control's failure to achieve its intended purpose, or its unintended side effects, are direct indicators of vulnerabilities that need to be addressed to strengthen the risk treatment plan. Question 5. Innovatech Solutions, a global provider of cloud-based analytics, must establish its information security risk management framework. Considering their operations across the European Union, California, and India, and their contractual agreements with financial institutions and healthcare providers, which of the following actions best represents the initial critical step in identifying and understanding their legal, regulatory, and contractual obligations as per ISO 27005/2018? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive review of all applicable international, national, and regional data protection laws, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act, sector-specific regulations, e.g., financial services regulations, healthcare mandates, and all relevant contractual clauses with third parties to establish a definitive list of compliance requirements. Option B. Relying on the IT department's existing knowledge of cybersecurity standards and best practices to infer potential legal and contractual obligations without direct consultation of official legal texts or agreements. Option C. Prioritizing the identification of regulations with the most severe penalties for noncompliance, such as those with significant financial sanctions, to ensure immediate focus on high-risk areas. Option D. Engaging external legal consultants to provide a broad overview of global data privacy trends, and then selectively applying those that seem most relevant to Innovatech's business model. The correct answer is A. Conducting a comprehensive review of all applicable international, national, and regional data protection laws, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act, sector-specific regulations, e.g., financial services regulations, healthcare mandates, and all relevant contractual clauses with third parties to establish a definitive list of compliance requirements. Explanation. Determining legal, regulatory, and contractual requirements is a foundational step in information security risk management, as outlined by ISO 27005/2018. This process involves identifying all applicable obligations that influence the organization's information security posture. For a multinational technology firm like Innovatech Solutions, which operates in multiple jurisdictions and handles sensitive customer data. This phase is particularly complex. The General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, in Europe, the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, in the United States, and specific industry regulations like HIPAA for healthcare data, if applicable, would all need to be considered. Contractual obligations with clients, partners, and service providers, such as data processing agreements or non-disclosure agreements, also impose specific security controls and notification requirements. The process requires a systematic approach to gather information from legal counsel, compliance officers, and relevant business units. It's not merely about listing regulations, but understanding their implications for risk assessment and treatment. For instance, a breach notification requirement under GDPR might dictate specific timelines and content for informing data subjects and supervisory authorities, which directly impacts the incident response plan and therefore the risk assessment of potential breaches. Similarly, contractual clauses on data residency or encryption standards will shape the technical and organizational measures implemented. The output of this activity informs the scope of the risk assessment, the criteria for risk evaluation, and the selection of appropriate risk treatment options. It is a continuous process as laws and regulations evolve. Question 6. When conducting threat identification for an organization operating under strict data privacy regulations, such as the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, and processing sensitive personal data, which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles outlined in ISO 27005:2018 for a holistic and context-aware identification of potential security risks? Option A. Focusing exclusively on known technical vulnerabilities in deployed systems and common malware signatures, while disregarding the specific legal obligations and potential for non-compliance as a threat vector. Option B. Prioritizing threats based on the perceived technical sophistication of potential attackers, without adequately considering the impact of less sophisticated threats or non-malicious human errors on information security. Option C. Relying solely on past security incident reports within the organization to identify recurring threat patterns, assuming that all significant future threats will manifest in similar ways. Option D. Systematically examining the organization's business context, regulatory obligations, like CCPA, operational environment, and potential threat actors' motivations and capabilities to identify a broad spectrum of potential events that could compromise information assets. Correct answer is A. Focusing exclusively on known technical vulnerabilities in deployed systems and common malware signatures, while disregarding the specific legal obligations and potential for non-compliance as a threat vector. Explanation: the process of identifying threats within an information security risk management framework, as guided by ISO 27005:2018, involves a systematic approach to uncovering potential events or actors that could negatively impact an organization's information assets. This is not merely about listing known vulnerabilities, but also about understanding the context in which an organization operates, including its business objectives, regulatory environment, and the nature of its information assets. Threat identification should consider various sources, including internal and external factors, human actions, intentional or accidental, environmental events, and technical failures. For instance, a regulatory requirement like GDPR or CCPA mandates specific data protection measures, and a failure to comply can be considered a threat arising from the legal and regulatory environment. Similarly, the increasing reliance on cloud services introduces threats related to vendor lock-in, data residency, and shared responsibility models. The identification of threats is an ongoing activity, evolving as the threat landscape changes and as the organization's information processing activities are modified. It is crucial to consider the intent and capabilities of potential threat actors, as well as the motivations behind their actions. For example, a nation-state actor might target critical infrastructure for geopolitical reasons, while a financially motivated cybercriminal might aim to extort money through ransomware. Understanding these motivations helps in categorizing and prioritizing threats. The outcome of this phase is a comprehensive list of potential threats that can be further analyzed in the risk assessment process. Question 7. Following a comprehensive risk assessment for a financial institution, the residual risk associated with the unauthorized disclosure of client financial records remains above the organization's defined risk acceptance threshold. Even after implementing enhanced access controls and mandatory annual security awareness training for all employees, the organization must now decide on the next course of action to mitigate this unacceptable residual risk, considering its legal obligations under data protection regulations like GDPR. Which risk treatment option, as outlined by ISO 27005-2018, would be the most prudent and compliant step to take in this scenario? Option A. Cease all processing activities involving sensitive client financial records until a zero-risk state can be guaranteed. Option B. Implement additional technical controls, such as multi-factor authentication for all access to client data repositories, and deploy advanced data loss prevention (DLP) solutions. Option C. Transfer the entire risk to a third-party cyber insurance provider, thereby absolving the organization of direct responsibility for any future disclosures. Option D. Formally document the residual risk as accepted, citing the cost of further mitigation as prohibitive compared to the potential impact. The correct answer is B. Implement additional technical controls, such as multi-factor authentication for all access to client data repositories, and deploy advanced data loss prevention (DLP) solutions. Explanation: the selection of appropriate risk treatment options under ISO 27005-2018 involves a systematic evaluation of various factors to ensure the chosen treatment effectively addresses the identified risks within the organization's context. The standard emphasizes that the decision-making process should consider the residual risk level, the organization's risk acceptance criteria, and the feasibility and cost-effectiveness of each treatment option. When a residual risk remains above the acceptable level after initial treatment, further action is required. The standard outlines 4 primary risk treatment options: modifying the risk, e.g., by applying controls, retaining the risk, accepting it, avoiding the risk, discontinuing the activity causing the risk, or sharing the risk, e.g., through insurance or outsourcing. The scenario describes a situation where the residual risk of unauthorized access to sensitive customer data is still deemed unacceptable after implementing access controls and user training. Given this, the organization must select a new treatment option. Among the choices, the most appropriate next step, when initial controls are insufficient and the risk is still high, is to consider further controls or to fundamentally change the process. Implementing additional technical controls, such as multi-factor authentication and enhanced logging, directly aims to reduce the likelihood and impact of unauthorized access, thereby lowering the residual risk. This aligns with the principle of risk modification. Retaining the risk without further action would be inappropriate as the residual risk is unacceptable. Avoiding the risk might be too disruptive if the data processing is essential. Sharing the risk through insurance might not fully mitigate the operational and reputational damage of a breach. Therefore, applying additional, more robust controls to modify the risk is the logical and compliant next step. Question 8. Consider a scenario where a newly discovered software flaw allows unauthorized access to a database containing sensitive customer financial data. This flaw can be exploited with moderate technical skill, and a proof-of-concept exploit is publicly available. According to ISO 27005-2018 principles for analyzing vulnerability severity, what is the most significant determinant of the severity rating for this vulnerability? Option A. The potential business impact resulting from the compromise of the customer financial data. Option B. The number of publicly documented instances of this specific software flaw being exploited. Option C. The complexity of the underlying code that contains the software flaw. Option D. The level of technical expertise required to successfully execute the exploit. The correct answer is A. The potential business impact resulting from the compromise of the customer financial data. Explanation: the question asks to identify the primary factor that determines the severity of a vulnerability in the context of ISO 27005-2018. ISO 27005 emphasizes a structured approach to risk management, where vulnerability analysis is a critical step. The severity of a vulnerability is not solely based on its technical exploitability or the ease with which it can be leveraged. Instead, it is intrinsically linked to the potential impact on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets. This impact is directly influenced by the value and criticality of the asset that the vulnerability affects. Therefore, understanding the business impact of a compromise to a specific asset is paramount in assessing the severity of a vulnerability. While technical characteristics like the complexity of exploit or the presence of known exploits are important for understanding the likelihood of exploitation, the severity of the vulnerability is fundamentally tied to the potential damage or loss that could result from its successful exploitation, which in turn depends on the value of the asset being compromised. This aligns with the core principles of risk management, which aim to protect valuable assets from threats. Question 9. During the risk treatment planning phase of an information security risk management program, an organization identifies a significant risk related to the potential exfiltration of sensitive customer data due to advanced persistent threats targeting its cloud-based customer relationship management (CRM) system. The organization is subject to stringent data protection regulations like the GDPR. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 27005/2018, which of the following best represents the comprehensive identification of resources required for effective risk treatment in this scenario? Option A. Dedicated cybersecurity analysts with expertise in cloud security and incident response. A budget for advanced endpoint detection and response, EDR, solutions and security information and event management, SIEM, tools, and the engagement of external forensic investigators for potential breach analysis. Option B. Development of a new internal policy for data handling and a one-time security awareness training session for all employees. Option C. Procurement of additional server capacity to isolate critical data and retraining of existing IT staff on basic cybersecurity awareness principles. Option D. Subscription to a general threat intelligence feed and a review of existing firewall configurations by the network administration team. Correct answer is A. Dedicated cybersecurity analysts with expertise in cloud security and incident response, a budget for advanced endpoint detection and response EDR, solutions and security information and event management, SIEM tools, and the engagement of external forensic investigators for potential breach analysis. Explanation. ISO 27005/2018, in its guidance on risk management, emphasizes the iterative nature of identifying and managing risks. When identifying resources required for risk treatment, the standard advocates for a comprehensive approach that considers not only direct technical controls, but also the broader organizational context. This includes human resources with specific skill sets, financial allocations for implementing and maintaining controls, and the necessary infrastructure. Furthermore, the process should also account for the potential need for external expertise or services, such as specialized security consultants or managed security service providers, to address complex or resource-intensive risks. The identification of these resources is intrinsically linked to the chosen risk treatment options and the organization's risk appetite, ensuring that the resources allocated are proportionate to the identified risks and aligned with business objectives. It is crucial to recognize that resource identification is not a one-time activity, but an ongoing process that needs to be revisited as the threat landscape evolves and organizational priorities shift. This continuous evaluation ensures that the risk treatment plan remains effective and sustainable. Question 10. An organization is developing its Information Security Management System, ISMS, in accordance with ISO 27001/2022. They have identified the need for a robust information security risk management process, which standard primarily guides the detailed methodology for conducting information security risk assessment and treatment, serving as a practical implementation blueprint for the risk management requirements stipulated in ISO 27001/2022 and from which controls can be selected for risk treatment. Option A. ISO 27005/2018. Option B. ISO 27001/2022. Option C. ISO 31000/2018. Option D. ISO 27002/2022. Correct answer is A. ISO 27005/2018. Explanation. ISO 27005/2018 provides a framework for information security risk management, while ISO 27001/2022 specifies the requirements for an information security management system, ISMS. ISO 27002, 2022 provides a code of practice for information security controls. The relationship is hierarchical and complementary. ISO 27001 mandates the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of an ISMS, which inherently includes risk management processes. ISO 27005 details the methodologies and processes for conducting information security risk assessment and treatment, which are essential components for fulfilling the risk management requirements of ISO 27001. ISO 27002 offers guidance on implementing controls that can be selected as part of the risk treatment plan developed according to ISO 27005, thereby supporting the achievement of the security objectives defined within the ISMS established under ISO 27001. Therefore, ISO 27001 sets the requirement for risk management. ISO 27005 provides the how-to for that risk management, and ISO 27002 offers a catalog of controls to implement as part of the risk treatment. The choice of controls from ISO 27002 is driven by the risk assessment outcomes detailed in ISO 27005 and the overall ISMS objectives mandated by ISO 27001. Question 11. Consider a multinational financial services corporation operating under strict regulatory mandates like the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, and the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. The organization has a highly complex IT infrastructure with a significant reliance on cloud services and a distributed workforce. Which of the following best defines the foundational risk management approach that this organization should adopt to comply with ISO 27005-2018 principles and its specific operational context? Option A. A purely qualitative risk assessment approach, focusing solely on identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities through expert judgment, with a risk appetite dictated by the lowest possible acceptable risk level to avoid any potential regulatory scrutiny. Option B. A reactive risk management strategy, primarily triggered by security incidents, with a risk appetite determined by the cost of remediation after an incident has occurred, and an approach that prioritizes immediate technical fixes over comprehensive risk analysis. Option C. A standardized quantitative risk assessment model, utilizing complex financial modeling to assign monetary values to all identified risks, with a risk appetite set to maximize profit by minimizing all security expenditures regardless of actual risk exposure. Option D. A hybrid risk assessment methodology, integrating qualitative analysis for initial screening and quantitative analysis for high-impact risks, with a risk appetite defined by regulatory compliance thresholds and business continuity objectives, ensuring continuous monitoring and adaptation to evolving threats and regulatory changes. Correct answer is D. A hybrid risk assessment methodology, integrating qualitative analysis for initial screening and quantitative analysis for high-impact risks, with a risk appetite defined by regulatory compliance thresholds and business continuity objectives, ensuring continuous monitoring and adaptation to evolving threats and regulatory changes. Explanation: the foundation of an effective information security risk management process, as outlined in ISO 27005-2018, lies in establishing a clear and contextually appropriate risk management approach. This approach is not a one-size-fits-all solution, but rather a tailored strategy that considers the organization's specific circumstances. Key elements influencing this approach include the organization's business objectives, its risk appetite, the legal and regulatory environment in which it operates, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, depending on the jurisdiction and industry, and the criticality of the information assets it seeks to protect. The chosen approach must also be scalable and adaptable to changes in the threat landscape, vulnerabilities, and business operations. Furthermore, the approach dictates the methodologies for risk identification, analysis, evaluation, treatment, and monitoring. A robust approach ensures that risk management activities are integrated into the organization's overall governance and decision-making processes, fostering a proactive security posture rather than a reactive one. The selection of appropriate risk assessment methodologies, such as qualitative, quantitative, or hybrid approaches, is a direct consequence of defining this foundational approach. It also guides the selection of risk criteria, which are essential for evaluating the significance of identified risks and making informed decisions about their treatment. Question 12. Following a comprehensive internal security audit of a financial services firm, the audit report details a critical finding. The access control mechanisms for customer databases are inconsistently applied, with several privileged accounts failing to enforce the mandated multi-factor authentication, thereby increasing the likelihood of unauthorized access to sensitive client financial data. Considering the principles of ISO 27005-2018, what is the most appropriate immediate action for the information security team after reviewing this report to ensure continued effective risk management? Option A. Immediately update the information security policy to reflect the audit finding and mandate stricter enforcement of multi-factor authentication across all systems, without further analysis of the current risk posture. Option B. Prioritize the remediation of the multi-factor authentication failures based solely on the severity of the finding as classified by the audit team, irrespective of the current residual risk assessment. Option C. Document the audit finding as a minor nonconformity and schedule a follow-up audit in 6 months to verify the implementation of corrective actions by the IT operations team. Option D. Initiate a reevaluation of the risk assessment for unauthorized access threats, focusing on the identified control deficiencies and their impact on residual risk levels, followed by the selection and implementation of appropriate risk treatment measures. The correct answer is D. Initiate a reevaluation of the risk assessment for unauthorized access threats, focusing on the identified control deficiencies and their impact on residual risk levels, followed by the selection and implementation of appropriate risk treatment measures. Explanation. The process of reviewing security audit reports within an ISO 27005 framework involves several critical steps to ensure that identified vulnerabilities and nonconformities are effectively addressed, and that the risk management process remains robust. When an audit report highlights a significant deviation from established security controls, such as a failure to enforce multi-factor authentication on critical systems, this directly impacts the residual risk assessment. The initial risk assessment would have assigned a certain level of risk to the threat of unauthorized access, mitigated by the control of multi-factor authentication. If this control is found to be ineffective or bypassed, the residual risk level increases. The subsequent actions must therefore focus on re-evaluating the risk based on this new understanding of control effectiveness. This involves identifying the root cause of the control failure, assessing the impact of the failure on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets, and then determining appropriate treatment options. Treatment options could include implementing compensating controls, enhancing the existing control, accepting the risk if it's within acceptable levels, or avoiding the activity altogether. The crucial aspect is that the review of the audit report triggers a reassessment and potential adjustment of the risk treatment plan, ensuring that the organization's risk posture accurately reflects the current threat landscape and control environment. This iterative review and update process is fundamental to maintaining an effective information security management system, as described in ISO 27005. Question 13. When establishing an information security risk management process in accordance with ISO 27005-2018, what is the primary purpose of systematically identifying and valuing information assets, particularly in the context of regulatory compliance like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR? Option A. Establish a baseline for prioritizing risks and determining the appropriate level of security controls based on the potential impact of their compromise. Option B. To ensure compliance with internal audit requirements by documenting the existence and location of all physical and digital assets. Option C. To facilitate the accurate calculation of insurance premiums for cyber liability policies by quantifying potential financial losses. Option D. To create a comprehensive inventory of all technological components within the organization for IT asset management purposes. The correct answer is A. To establish a baseline for prioritizing risks and determining the appropriate level of security controls based on the potential impact of their compromise. Explanation. The process of identifying and valuing assets within an information security risk management framework, as guided by ISO 27005-2018, requires a systematic approach to understanding what needs protection and why. Asset identification involves cataloging all information assets, which can include tangible items like hardware and physical documents, as well as intangible elements such as intellectual property, reputation, and data. Valuation, on the other hand, assigns a value to these assets, which is crucial for prioritizing risks and allocating resources effectively. This valuation is not solely monetary. It encompasses business, operational, legal, and reputational impacts. For instance, a data breach impacting customer personal information, governed by regulations like GDPR, would incur significant financial penalties and reputational damage, thus a high valuation. The methodology for valuation should consider the criticality of the asset to the organization's operations, its replacement cost, its market value, if applicable, and the potential consequences of its compromise. A comprehensive asset register, detailing ownership, location, and criticality, forms the foundation for effective risk assessment. Without a thorough understanding of what constitutes an asset and its associated value, risk treatment decisions would be arbitrary and potentially ineffective, failing to address the most significant threats to the organization's information security objectives. The valuation process directly influences the determination of acceptable risk levels and the selection of appropriate controls. Question 14. Consider a multinational corporation operating in the financial services sector, subject to stringent regulations like the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, and the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. During the information security risk assessment phase, the organization identifies a critical vulnerability in its customer-facing web application that could lead to a significant data breach. Which of the following stakeholder groups, based on their primary responsibilities and influence within the context of ISO 27005-2018, will be most directly involved in providing essential input for the risk treatment plan concerning this specific vulnerability, considering both operational feasibility and regulatory compliance? Option A. The Legal and Compliance Department, due to their mandate to interpret and ensure adherence to regulations like GDPR and PCI DSS, and their role in advising on the legal ramifications of potential breaches. Option B. The IT Support Desk, primarily focused on end-user technical assistance and day-to-day system maintenance, with limited direct involvement in strategic risk treatment decisions. Option C. The Marketing Department, responsible for customer communication and brand reputation, as they would be most affected by negative publicity resulting from a data breach. Option D. The Human Resources Department, tasked with employee onboarding and training, as their role is mainly related to personnel security aspects rather than application-level vulnerabilities. The correct answer is A. The Legal and Compliance Department, due to their mandate to interpret and ensure adherence to regulations like GDPR and PCI DSS, and their role in advising on the legal ramifications of potential breaches. Explanation: the identification of stakeholders and their roles in information security risk management, as guided by ISO 27005-2018, is a foundational step. Stakeholders are individuals or entities that have an interest in or can affect, be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by the information security risk management process. Their involvement is crucial for ensuring that the risk treatment plan is comprehensive, practical, and supported by the organization. Understanding their roles helps in defining responsibilities, communication channels, and the scope of their influence. For instance, the board of directors has a strategic oversight role, ensuring that risk management aligns with business objectives and that adequate resources are allocated. The IT department often plays an operational role in implementing controls and monitoring security. Legal and compliance departments ensure adherence to relevant regulations, such as GDPR or HIPAA, which can significantly impact risk assessment and treatment decisions. End users, while sometimes overlooked, are critical as they are the ones who interact with information assets daily and can inadvertently introduce risks. Their perspective is vital for understanding the practical implications of security policies and controls. Therefore, a comprehensive stakeholder analysis considers not only internal parties, but also external entities like regulators, suppliers, and even customers, each with distinct interests and potential impacts on the organization's information security posture. Question 15. Consider an organization that relies heavily on a distributed network of remote sensors for environmental monitoring, with data transmitted wirelessly to a central processing unit. Which of the following best represents a comprehensive approach to identifying potential threats to this information system, encompassing natural, human, and technical categories, in accordance with ISO 27005-2018 principles? Option A. Reviewing sensor hardware specifications for known manufacturing defects, analyzing historical weather patterns for extreme events that could affect sensor connectivity, and assessing the potential for unauthorized access to the wireless transmission protocol. Option B. Investigating potential denial-of-service attacks against the central server, evaluating the impact of a solar flare on satellite communication links, and training staff on basic cybersecurity awareness. Option C. Documenting all software versions used by the central processing unit, performing a penetration test on the main server, and creating a policy for employee password management. Option D. Identifying all physical locations of the remote sensors, assessing the likelihood of a widespread internet outage, and developing a disaster recovery plan for the central data storage. The correct answer is A. Reviewing sensor hardware specifications for known manufacturing defects, analyzing historical weather patterns for extreme events that could affect sensor connectivity, and assessing the potential for unauthorized access to the wireless transmission protocol. Explanation. The process of identifying potential threats is a foundational step in information security risk management, as outlined in ISO 27005-2018. This involves systematically enumerating events or circumstances that could negatively impact an organization's information assets. Threats can originate from various sources, broadly categorized as natural, human, and technical. Natural threats encompass environmental events like floods, earthquakes, or extreme weather conditions that can disrupt operations or damage infrastructure. Human threats include both intentional actions, such as malware attacks, unauthorized access or social engineering, and unintentional actions, like accidental data deletion or misconfiguration of systems. Technical threats arise from vulnerabilities in hardware, software, or network infrastructure, such as unpatched systems, coding errors, or hardware failures. A comprehensive threat identification process requires considering all these categories and their potential manifestations within the organization's specific context. For instance, a cloud-based service provider might face significant technical threats from distributed denial-of-service attacks and natural threats from power grid failures affecting data centers, while also being susceptible to human threats from insider negligence or targeted phishing campaigns. Effective identification involves brainstorming, reviewing historical incident data, consulting threat intelligence feeds, and conducting vulnerability assessments. The goal is to create a broad list of potential threats that can then be analyzed further in the risk assessment phase. Question 16. When implementing an information security risk management program aligned with ISO 27005-2018, what fundamental principle underpins the selection and establishment of communication channels to ensure effective risk awareness and coordinated response across diverse organizational functions and external parties? Option A. Prioritizing the use of automated, system-generated notifications for all risk-related information to guarantee consistent delivery. Option B. Ensuring that communication channels are tailored to the specific risk context, audience needs, and the required level of detail for each stakeholder group. Option C. Focusing exclusively on internal communication channel to maintain confidentiality of risk information within the organization. Option D. Establishing a single, centralized communication platform for all risk management activities to simplify oversight and reporting. The correct answer is B. Ensuring that communication channels are tailored to the specific risk context, audience needs, and the required level of detail for each stakeholder group. Explanation. The establishment of communication channels within an information security risk management framework, as guided by ISO 27005-2018, is crucial for ensuring that relevant stakeholders are informed about risks, controls, and the overall security posture. This process involves identifying who needs to know what, when, and how. It's not merely about broadcasting information, but about fostering a shared understanding and facilitating coordinated action. Effective communication channels enable the timely dissemination of risk assessment findings, the rationale behind risk treatment decisions, and updates on the effectiveness of implemented controls. They also provide mechanisms for feedback, allowing for continuous improvement of the risk management process. For instance, a risk owner might need to be informed of a newly identified high-severity risk to their asset, requiring a specific communication channel that ensures prompt delivery and confirmation of receipt. Similarly, regulatory bodies may require formal reporting on specific risk metrics, necessitating established channels for such disclosures. The selection of appropriate communication methods and frequency is contingent upon the nature of the information, the audience, and the urgency of the matter, all of which are integral to the holistic risk management lifecycle. The objective is to create a robust, two-way flow of information that supports informed decision-making and promotes a security-aware culture throughout the organization. Question 17. Consider an organization that processes sensitive personal data for its clients, as mandated by regulations like the GDPR. The organization's primary information asset is a custom-built customer relationship management (CRM) system. While the direct replacement cost of the hardware and software for this CRM is estimated at $250,000, the system also contains proprietary customer segmentation algorithms and detailed client interaction histories. A significant security incident that compromises the integrity or confidentiality of this data could lead to regulatory fines, a loss of client trust, and a severe blow to the organization's market reputation. In the context of ISO 27005/2018, which of the following best represents the most critical consideration for valuing this information asset from a risk management perspective? Option A. The direct financial cost of acquiring and implementing a replacement CRM system, including hardware, software, and initial setup. Option B. The potential impact on the organization's reputation, client trust, and the value of proprietary algorithms, in addition to direct financial losses. Option C. The market value of the physical servers and network infrastructure that host the CRM system, depreciated over their useful life. Option D. The estimated cost of regulatory compliance and the immediate fines that could be levied by data protection authorities. The correct answer is B. The potential impact on the organization's reputation, client trust, and the value of proprietary algorithms, in addition to direct financial losses. Explanation. The fundamental principle of asset valuation in ISO 27005/2018 is to consider both tangible and intangible aspects to accurately reflect an asset's true worth and the potential impact of its compromise. Tangible assets are physical or quantifiable items, such as servers, network devices, or financial reserves. Intangible assets, conversely, are non-physical but possess significant value, including reputation, brand image, intellectual property, customer trust, and the knowledge held by employees. When assessing the risk associated with an information asset, the potential impact on the organization's reputation, the loss of competitive advantage derived from intellectual property, or the erosion of customer loyalty are often far more significant than the direct financial cost of replacing a physical component. Therefore, a comprehensive risk assessment must encompass the potential damage to these less visible but critically important intangible elements. For instance, a data breach might not only incur costs for system remediation, but also lead to a substantial decline in customer confidence, resulting in lost future revenue and long-term damage to the organization's brand. Similarly, the compromise of proprietary algorithms or trade secrets could render an organization's market position untenable. This holistic approach ensures that the risk treatment decisions are proportionate to the overall potential harm, not just the immediate financial outlay. Question 18. When evaluating the likelihood of a specific threat, such as unauthorized access via a zero-day exploit targeting a critical web application, what primary evidence-based factors, as guided by ISO 27005/2018, would an information security risk assessor prioritize to determine the probability of occurrence? Option A. The overall cost of potential damage if the exploit were successful, the availability of disaster recovery solutions, and the number of employees who have completed basic cybersecurity awareness training. Option B. The total number of security controls implemented across the organization, the perceived technical skill level of the internal IT support team, and the organization's compliance status with general data protection regulations. Option C. The current market value of the data stored within the web application, the contractual obligations with third-party service providers, and the organization's cybersecurity insurance policy coverage. Option D. The observed frequency of similar successful exploits against comparable systems in the industry, the known sophistication and intent of threat actors targeting this sector, and the specific technical vulnerabilities present in the application that are exploitable by such an exploit. The correct answer is D. The observed frequency of similar successful exploits against comparable systems in the industry, the known sophistication and intent of threat actors targeting this sector, and the specific technical vulnerabilities present in the application that are exploitable by such an exploit. Explanation: the determination of the probability of threat occurrence within ISO 27005, 2018 involves assessing how likely a specific threat event is to happen. This is not a purely mathematical calculation, but rather an estimation based on available evidence and expert judgment. Key factors influencing this estimation include the history of similar events, both within the organization and in the broader industry, the existence and effectiveness of threat actor capabilities and motivations, the vulnerability of the asset to the threat, and the general threat landscape. For instance, if an organization has experienced multiple successful phishing attacks targeting its employees in the past year, and there is a known increase in sophisticated phishing campaigns globally, the probability of a similar event occurring again would be considered higher. Conversely, if an organization has robust technical controls and continuous security awareness training that has demonstrably reduced past incidents, the probability might be assessed as lower. The process often involves qualitative scales, e.g., low, medium, high, or semi-quantitative scales, e.g., numerical ranges mapped to likelihood categories, derived from analyzing threat intelligence, incident logs, and the organization's specific operating environment. It is crucial to distinguish this from the impact, which is a separate component of risk assessment. The aim is to provide a realistic appraisal of the likelihood of a threat materializing, informing subsequent risk treatment decisions. Question 19. An organization operating under stringent data privacy regulations akin to the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, has completed its risk assessment and identified a critical risk related to unauthorized access to sensitive customer data stored in a cloud-based customer relationship management (CRM) system. The risk assessment indicates a high likelihood of a targeted phishing attack leading to credential compromise, with a severe potential impact on customer trust and regulatory fines. The organization is now in the process of selecting appropriate security controls. Which of the following principles should most strongly guide the selection of controls to mitigate this specific risk? Option A. Selecting controls based on industry best practices mentioned in general security frameworks, without a specific analysis of their effectiveness against the identified risk or the organization's risk appetite. Option B. Implementing the most technologically advanced security solutions available, irrespective of their direct impact on the identified risk or overall cost. Option C. Prioritizing controls that demonstrably reduce the identified risk to an acceptable level, considering cost-effectiveness and operational feasibility, while aligning with legal and business requirements. Option D. Focusing solely on controls that address the technical vulnerability of the CRM system, without considering the human element or regulatory compliance. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing controls that demonstrably reduce the identified risk to an acceptable level, considering cost-effectiveness and operational feasibility, while aligning with legal and business requirements. Explanation: the selection of security controls within an information security risk management framework, as guided by ISO 27005, 2018, is a multifaceted process. It requires a thorough understanding of the identified risks, their potential impact, and the likelihood of their occurrence. The primary objective is to reduce the identified risks to an acceptable level. When considering the deployment of security controls, organizations must evaluate their effectiveness in mitigating specific threats and vulnerabilities. This evaluation involves assessing the technical feasibility, operational impact, and cost-effectiveness of each potential control. Furthermore, the chosen controls must align with the organization's overall business objectives and legal or regulatory obligations, such as data protection regulations like GDPR or national cybersecurity laws. The process involves considering the inherent residual risk after control implementation and comparing it against the organization's risk appetite. Therefore, the most effective approach to selecting controls is to prioritize those that offer the greatest risk reduction for the investment, considering both direct costs and indirect impacts on operations. This systematic evaluation ensures that resources are allocated efficiently to achieve the desired level of information security. Question 20. Consider a financial institution that has identified a threat of advanced persistent threats, APT, targeting its client transaction data. The organization has also identified a vulnerability related to legacy systems that are not regularly patched. When developing likelihood scenarios for this risk, what is the most effective approach to ensure the scenarios are practical and informative for risk assessment, aligning with the principles of ISO 27005-2018? Option A. Develop scenarios based on hypothetical internal employee negligence that could inadvertently expose the legacy systems, irrespective of external APT capabilities. Option B. Create generic scenarios describing the possibility of data breaches without specifying the method or the targeted system, focusing on the potential impact. Option C. Construct scenarios that detail specific attack vectors used by known APT groups against similar financial institutions, incorporating the identified legacy system weaknesses as the point of exploitation. Option D. Formulate scenarios that focus solely on the technical vulnerabilities of the legacy systems, assuming an external actor with unspecified capabilities will exploit them. The correct answer is C. Construct scenarios that detail specific attack vectors used by known APT groups against similar financial institutions, incorporating the identified legacy system weaknesses as the point of exploitation. Explanation. The development of likelihood scenarios in ISO 27005-2018 is a crucial step in risk assessment. It involves defining specific, observable events or conditions that could lead to a threat exploiting a vulnerability. These scenarios are not abstract probabilities, but concrete descriptions of how a risk might materialize. For instance, a scenario for unauthorized access to sensitive customer data might involve a phishing attack that tricks an employee into revealing their credentials, followed by the attacker using those credentials to access the database. The key is to make these scenarios detailed enough to be understandable and to inform the subsequent likelihood estimation. The effectiveness of a scenario hinges on its relevance to the identified threats and vulnerabilities within the specific context of the organization and its information assets. It should consider the nature of the threat actor, their motivations and capabilities, and the specific weaknesses present in the information system or processes. A well-defined scenario provides a basis for consistently assessing the probability of an incident occurring, which is essential for prioritizing risks and selecting appropriate controls. It is about translating abstract threats into tangible events that can be evaluated. Question 21. When undertaking a systematic identification of information security vulnerabilities across an organization, as stipulated by ISO 27005-2018, which of the following represents the most holistic and effective approach to uncovering potential weaknesses in systems, processes, and people? Option A. Focusing exclusively on the technical configuration of network devices and servers, assuming all other aspects are adequately managed. Option B. Primarily relying on external penetration testing reports and vendor-supplied security advisories to identify system-level flaws. Option C. Conducting periodic reviews of access control logs and incident response records to infer potential weaknesses. Option D. A multifaceted approach combining automated vulnerability scanning of IT infrastructure, structured interviews and observations of operational processes, and targeted security awareness assessments for staff. Correct answer is D. A multifaceted approach combining automated vulnerability scanning of IT infrastructure, structured interviews and observations of operational processes, and targeted security awareness assessments for staff. Explanation. The process of identifying vulnerabilities within an organization's information security framework, as guided by ISO 27005-2018, requires a comprehensive approach that scrutinizes not only technical systems, but also the human and procedural elements. Vulnerabilities are weaknesses that could be exploited by threats to cause harm to assets. When considering the identification of vulnerabilities, it is crucial to move beyond superficial technical scans. A thorough identification process involves examining the underlying design and implementation of systems, the clarity and enforcement of policies and procedures, and the security awareness and practices of personnel. For instance, a technical vulnerability might be an unpatched server, but a procedural vulnerability could be the lack of a formal change management process, which allows unauthorized modifications. A human vulnerability might be insufficient training on phishing awareness, leading to credential compromise. ISO 27005 emphasizes that risk assessment is an iterative process, and vulnerability identification is a key input. This identification should be driven by understanding the context of the organization, its assets, and the potential threats it faces, considering factors such as the complexity of systems, the maturity of security controls, and the susceptibility of individuals to social engineering. The goal is to uncover potential weaknesses before they are exploited. Question 22. Following the implementation of a risk treatment plan designed to mitigate the risk of unauthorized access to sensitive customer data, an organization conducts a post-implementation review. This review reveals that, while the implemented technical controls are functioning as designed, a recent legislative update, specifically the Hypothetical Digital Privacy Act of 2025, DPA 25, has introduced new data handling obligations that were not foreseen during the initial risk assessment. The DPA 25 mandates stricter consent mechanisms and data anonymization protocols for customer interactions. What is the most crucial factor to consider when deciding whether to revise the existing risk treatment plan in light of this new information? Option A. The historical success rate of the original risk treatment plan in preventing security incidents before the DPA 25 was enacted. Option B. The cost associated with implementing additional security controls to comply with the DPA 25, regardless of their impact on the residual risk. Option C. The extent to which the new legislative obligations alter the residual risk profile of unauthorized access to customer data and the effectiveness of current controls in meeting these new requirements. Option D. The number of employees who have received training on the original risk treatment plan, irrespective of their understanding of the new legislative mandates. The correct answer is C. The extent to which the new legislative obligations alter the residual risk profile of unauthorized access to customer data and the effectiveness of current controls in meeting these new requirements. Explanation. The effectiveness of a risk treatment plan is intrinsically linked to the ongoing monitoring and review of identified risks and the implemented controls. ISO 27005, 2018 emphasizes that risk management is a cyclical process, not a one-time event. When reviewing a risk treatment plan, the primary objective is to determine if the chosen treatments are still appropriate and effective in reducing risks to an acceptable level. This involves reassessing the residual risk, considering any changes in the threat landscape, vulnerabilities, or the business context. It also means evaluating the performance of the controls implemented as part of the treatment plan. For instance, if a new regulatory requirement emerges, such as stricter data residency rules mandated by the GDPR, it could necessitate a re-evaluation of existing controls and potentially the risk treatment plan itself. The review process should also consider the impact of external factors, like emerging technologies or geopolitical shifts, that might introduce new threats or alter the likelihood or impact of existing ones. Furthermore, the review should confirm that the controls are operating as intended and are not introducing unintended side effects. Therefore, the most critical aspect of reviewing a risk treatment plan is to ensure it remains aligned with the organization's current risk appetite and security objectives, validating that the residual risk is still acceptable. Question 23. An organization is developing its information security risk treatment plan in accordance with ISO 27005-2018, considering potential impacts on various departments, including legal, operations, and customer service. To ensure the selected risk treatments are both effective and broadly accepted, what is the primary benefit of actively consulting with representatives from each of these departments during the risk treatment selection phase? Option A. To delegate the responsibility for risk treatment implementation to the respective departmental managers, thereby reducing the burden on the information security team. Option B. To solely gather input on the technical specifications of potential security controls, without regard for their broader business implications or operational constraints. Option C. To confirm that the chosen risk treatments meet the minimum requirements stipulated by the organization's internal audit department, as per their annual review schedule. Option D. To validate the feasibility and acceptability of proposed risk treatments from diverse operational and business perspectives, ensuring alignment with organizational objectives and regulatory compliance. The correct answer is D. To validate the feasibility and acceptability of proposed risk treatments from diverse operational and business perspectives, ensuring alignment with organizational objectives and regulatory compliance. Explanation: the fundamental principle of ISO 27005/2018 regarding stakeholder consultation in risk management is to ensure that decisions are informed by a broad range of perspectives and expertise, thereby enhancing the effectiveness and acceptance of the risk treatment plan. Clause 6. 1.3. Risk assessment emphasizes the need to identify and involve relevant stakeholders throughout the risk management process. This includes consulting with them to understand their concerns, expectations, and the potential impact of identified risks and proposed treatments on their areas of responsibility or interest. When considering the selection of risk treatment options, as outlined in Clause 7.2, risk treatment, it is crucial to engage stakeholders to gauge the feasibility, acceptability, and potential side effects of each option. This consultation helps in selecting treatments that are not only technically sound, but also align with the organization's overall objectives and risk appetite, as well as legal and regulatory requirements, such as those mandated by data protection laws like the GDPR or industry-specific regulations. The process of consulting stakeholders ensures that the risk management framework is practical, sustainable, and supported by those who will be affected by or involved in its implementation. This iterative engagement fosters a shared understanding of risks and a collective commitment to information security. Question 24. A cybersecurity research firm has published a detailed report outlining a new class of zero-day exploits targeting the core cryptographic libraries used by a significant portion of the global financial sector. This exploit allows for the surreptitious decryption of encrypted financial transactions without detection. Given that the organization's current information security policies and procedures are based on a risk assessment conducted 2 years ago, which of the following actions best reflects the principles of ISO 27005/2018 in response to this emerging threat? Option A. Conduct a targeted review of only those security controls directly related to data encryption, without revisiting the broader risk assessment or other treatment measures. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the entire risk assessment and risk treatment plan, including the identification of new threats, re-evaluation of existing risks, and modification of controls to address the newly identified vulnerabilities and their potential impact. Option C. Issue a directive to all personnel to cease all financial transactions utilizing the affected cryptographic libraries until a patch is developed and deployed by the vendor, bypassing formal risk management processes. Option D. Immediately update the incident response plan to include specific procedures for detecting and responding to the newly disclosed cryptographic exploits, assuming existing risk treatment measures are still adequate. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the entire risk assessment and risk treatment plan, including the identification of new threats, re-evaluation of existing risks, and modification of controls to address the newly identified vulnerabilities and their potential impact. Explanation: the core of ISO 27005/2018 is the iterative risk management process. When an organization's context changes or new threats and vulnerabilities emerge, the existing risk assessment and treatment plan must be reviewed and updated. This review is not merely a procedural check, but a fundamental re-evaluation of the information security risks. Clause 7.1.2 of ISO 27005/2018 emphasizes the need to consider changes in the organization's internal and external context, including legal and regulatory requirements, technological advancements, and business objectives. A significant change in the threat landscape, such as the emergence of a novel, sophisticated attack vector targeting a previously unaddressed asset class, necessitates a re-evaluation of the risk assessment. This re-evaluation involves identifying new threats, assessing their potential impact and likelihood, and determining if existing controls are still effective or if new controls are required. The process of updating policies and procedures is a direct outcome of this re-evaluation, ensuring that the risk treatment plan remains relevant and effective. Therefore, a comprehensive review of the entire risk assessment and treatment plan, encompassing the identification of new risks, the re-evaluation of existing ones, and the modification of controls is the most appropriate response to a significant shift in the threat environment. This aligns with the iterative nature of risk management described in the standard. Question 25. Consider an organization that processes sensitive financial transactions and is subject to stringent regulatory compliance, including specific data residency requirements. When identifying information assets as per ISO 27005/2018, which of the following approaches most effectively captures the full scope of critical assets and their interdependencies for robust risk assessment? Option A. Prioritizing asset identification based on perceived monetary value alone, neglecting the impact of regulatory noncompliance or operational disruption on less tangible assets. Option B. Cataloging all hardware and software inventory, supplemented by a high-level list of data types processed, without explicit mapping of data flows or regulatory impact. Option C. Creating a detailed inventory of all information assets, including tangible hardware, software, and intangible intellectual property, customer data, brand reputation elements, documenting their interdependencies, owners, classification, and mapping them to relevant legal and regulatory obligations like data residency mandates. Option D. Focusing solely on assets directly involved in customer-facing applications, assuming internal systems are less critical and will be managed through general IT security policies. The correct answer is B. Cataloging all hardware and software inventory, supplemented by a high-level list of data types processed, without explicit mapping of data flows or regulatory impact. Explanation: the process of identifying information assets within an organization, as guided by ISO 27005/2018, involves a systematic approach to cataloging and understanding what needs to be protected. This goes beyond simply listing hardware and software. It requires a comprehensive view that includes intangible assets, such as intellectual property, brand reputation, and customer data, as well as the processes and relationships that support them. The identification phase is foundational for subsequent risk assessment activities, as an incomplete or inaccurate asset inventory will inevitably lead to an incomplete or inaccurate risk assessment. Understanding the context of the organization, its objectives, and its stakeholders, as outlined in ISO 27001 Annex A-4, is crucial for determining what constitutes a valuable asset. For instance, a customer database containing personal identifiable information, PI, is an asset that requires protection due to legal and regulatory obligations, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which mandates specific controls for processing and storing such data. The value of an asset is not solely determined by its monetary worth, but also by its criticality to business operations and its susceptibility to harm. Therefore, a thorough asset identification process considers the various attributes of each asset, including its owner, location, dependencies, and the impact if its confidentiality, integrity, or availability were compromised. This detailed understanding enables the organization to prioritize risks and allocate resources effectively to protect its most valuable information. Question 26. A financial services firm, subject to regulations like the GDPR and the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, has identified a potential threat actor group. This group is known for its advanced persistent threat (APT) capabilities, demonstrating significant financial backing, a highly skilled technical team proficient in reverse engineering and exploit development, and a history of successful infiltration into similarly regulated entities through highly targeted spear phishing campaigns and zero-day vulnerabilities. The firm's internal threat intelligence unit has also noted that this group has conducted extensive passive reconnaissance of the firm's external digital footprint. Considering the principles of ISO 27005/2018, which of the following best characterizes the primary assessment of this threat actor's profile in relation to their potential impact on the organization's information security? Option A. The threat actor's sophisticated exploit development and comprehensive network reconnaissance indicate a high capability to leverage advanced attack vectors, posing a significant risk that requires robust, multi-layered defensive strategies. Option B. The threat actor's APT designation signifies a low likelihood of success due to inherent organizational security measures, requiring only a review of existing access control policies. Option C. The threat actor's reliance on spear phishing suggests a primary vulnerability in employee awareness, which can be mitigated solely through regular security awareness training sessions. Option D. The threat actor's financial backing implies a focus on ransomware attacks, necessitating the implementation of a comprehensive backup and recovery solution as the sole risk treatment. Correct answer is A. The threat actor's sophisticated exploit development and comprehensive network reconnaissance indicate a high capability to leverage advanced attack vectors, posing a significant risk that requires robust, multi-layered defensive strategies. Explanation. The scenario describes an organization that has identified a threat actor with significant technical expertise and substantial financial resources, capable of developing novel zero-day exploits. This threat actor also possesses a deep understanding of the target organization's network architecture, gained through prior reconnaissance. ISO 27005-2018 emphasizes understanding threat capabilities and the means by which they can exploit vulnerabilities. Threat capability refers to the skills, resources, and knowledge an actor possesses. Attack vectors are the pathways or methods used to deliver a threat to an asset. In this case, the threat actor's high technical proficiency, financial backing for exploit development, and detailed network knowledge directly contribute to their capability. The ability to develop zero-day exploits signifies a sophisticated capability to bypass existing security controls. When combined with a thorough understanding of the target's architecture, this capability allows for the selection and execution of highly effective and targeted attack vectors, such as advanced persistent threats, APT, or highly customized malware delivered through sophisticated social engineering or supply chain compromises. The critical element here is the combination of these factors, which elevates the potential impact and likelihood of a successful attack. Therefore, assessing the threat actor's sophisticated exploit development and in-depth network knowledge as primary indicators of their capability, which in turn informs the selection of appropriate attack vectors, is the most accurate interpretation. Question 27. When utilizing vulnerability scanning tools as part of an ISO 27005-2018 compliant risk assessment, what is the primary consideration for translating raw scan findings into actionable risk treatment decisions? Option A. Conducting extensive penetration testing immediately after every vulnerability scan to validate all findings. Option B. Prioritizing remediation based solely on the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, CVSS scores reported by the scanning tool. Option C. Correlating identified vulnerabilities with asset criticality, potential impact, and existing control effectiveness to derive a contextualized risk level. Option D. Focusing exclusively on vulnerabilities that have publicly disclosed exploit code available. Correct answer is C. Correlating identified vulnerabilities with asset criticality, potential impact, and existing control effectiveness to derive a contextualized risk level. Explanation. The fundamental principle behind effective vulnerability scanning in the context of ISO 27005-2018 is not merely identifying technical flaws, but integrating these findings into a broader risk management framework. Vulnerability scanning tools, while essential for discovering weaknesses, provide raw data. This data must be contextualized by understanding the asset's value, the potential impact of exploitation, and the likelihood of a threat actor leveraging the identified vulnerability. ISO 27005 emphasizes a structured approach to risk assessment, which involves identifying assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and existing controls. The output of a vulnerability scan is a list of vulnerabilities, often accompanied by severity ratings based on technical characteristics, e.g., CVSS scores. However, a vulnerability actual risk to an organization is determined by its exploitability within the specific operational environment and its potential to compromise the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information assets. Therefore, a scan's output is an input to the risk assessment process, not the entirety of it. The process requires correlating identified vulnerabilities with asset criticality, threat intelligence, and the effectiveness of existing controls to determine the residual risk. For instance, a high-severity vulnerability on a non-critical, isolated development server might pose a lower risk than a medium-severity vulnerability on a production database server containing sensitive customer data. Selection of appropriate scanning techniques, such as authenticated versus unauthenticated scans, network-based versus host-based scans, and the frequency of scanning are all driven by the risk assessment and the specific context of the information security management system. The goal is to prioritize remediation efforts based on the calculated risk, ensuring that resources are allocated to address the most significant threats to the organization's information assets. Question 28. Consider an organization that has identified a significant risk of unauthorized disclosure of sensitive customer data due to inadequate access management practices for its customer relationship management (CRM) system. The organization is operating under the strict data privacy requirements of the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. Which of the following approaches to designing and implementing administrative controls for this scenario would best align with the principles of ISO 27005-2018 and the regulatory landscape? Option A. Develop a comprehensive access control policy that clearly defines roles, responsibilities, and the principle of least privilege for CRM system access, coupled with mandatory role-based training for all personnel with CRM access, and establish a regular audit process to review access logs and user permissions. Option B. Rely solely on the existing network firewall to prevent external access to the CRM system, assuming internal threats are negligible, and that the CCPA primarily focuses on external breaches. Option C. Disseminate a general awareness poster about data privacy to all employees, stating that customer data should be handled with care, and assume that employees will inherently understand and apply appropriate access restrictions without specific guidance. Option D. Implement a technical solution that encrypts all data within the CRM system, thereby mitigating the risk of unauthorized disclosure regardless of access controls, and inform users that data is now encrypted. The correct answer is A. Develop a comprehensive access control policy that clearly defines roles, responsibilities, and the principle of least privilege for CRM system access, coupled with mandatory role-based training for all personnel with CRM access, and establish a regular audit process to review access logs and user permissions. Explanation. The process of selecting and implementing administrative controls within an information security risk management framework, as guided by ISO 27005-2018, involves several key considerations. When designing administrative controls, an organization must align these controls with the identified risks, the organization's risk appetite, and relevant legal and regulatory obligations, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, or industry-specific mandates like HIPAA. The effectiveness of an administrative control is not solely determined by its existence, but by its practical application, enforceability, and integration into the organization's operational processes. For instance, a policy on acceptable use of mobile devices, while an administrative control requires clear communication, training, and mechanisms for monitoring and enforcement to be truly effective. The selection of controls should also consider their feasibility, cost-effectiveness, and potential impact on business operations. A control that is overly burdensome or impractical to implement will likely be circumvented or ignored, rendering it ineffective. Therefore, a holistic approach that considers the entire life cycle of the control, from design to ongoing monitoring and review, is crucial. The principle of least privilege, a fundamental security concept often implemented through administrative controls like access management, is a prime example of a control that, when properly designed and enforced, significantly reduces the attack surface and the potential impact of insider threats or compromised accounts. The ISO 27005 standard emphasizes that controls should be selected based on their ability to reduce the likelihood or impact of identified threats exploiting vulnerabilities, thereby bringing the residual risk to an acceptable level. This involves a continuous cycle of risk assessment, treatment, and review, ensuring that administrative controls remain relevant and effective in the face of evolving threats and organizational changes. Question 29. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 27005-2018 for information security risk assessment, how is the overall risk level typically derived when evaluating a specific threat vulnerability pair? Option A. By solely considering the severity of the vulnerability, irrespective of the likelihood of exploitation or the potential impact. Option B. By averaging the number of identified threats and the number of affected information assets. Option C. By combining the assessed likelihood of the threat exploiting the vulnerability with the magnitude of the potential impact on information assets. Option D, by exclusively evaluating the technical controls in place to mitigate the vulnerability without factoring in likelihood or impact. The correct answer is C, by combining the assessed likelihood of the threat, exploiting the vulnerability with the magnitude of the potential impact on information assets. Explanation. In ISO 27005, 2018, the process of risk assessment involves determining the level of risk by combining the identified likelihood of a threat exploiting a vulnerability and the potential impact of that exploitation on the organization's information assets. The standard outlines that risk is generally understood as a function of likelihood and impact. While specific numerical calculations are not mandated and organizations can define their own scales, the conceptual relationship is crucial. For instance, a common qualitative approach involves a risk matrix where likelihood, e.g., rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain, is plotted against impact, e.g., negligible, minor, moderate, major, catastrophic. The intersection of a specific likelihood and impact level determines the resulting risk level, e.g., low, medium, high, very high. For example, if a threat is assessed as likely to occur and the resulting impact is major, the combined risk level would be significantly higher than if the likelihood was unlikely and the impact was minor. The standard emphasizes that the method used to combine these factors should be consistent and clearly documented within the organization's risk management framework, allowing for a structured and repeatable approach to risk evaluation and prioritization. This combination is fundamental to making informed decisions about risk treatment. Question 30. When undertaking the initial phase of establishing the context for information security risk management, in accordance with ISO 27005-2018, what is the primary objective of defining the organizational and external issues that influence the information security risk management process? Option A, to determine the exact financial value of potential information security incidents, allowing for a direct cost-benefit analysis of all proposed security controls. Option B, to establish a detailed inventory of all information assets and their criticality, which is a separate, subsequent activity within the risk assessment phase. Option C, to ensure the risk management framework is aligned with the organization's strategic objectives and operational realities, thereby enabling effective identification and assessment of relevant risks. Option D, to preemptively identify all potential threats and vulnerabilities, irrespective of their likelihood or impact, to create a comprehensive threat landscape document. The correct answer is C, to ensure the risk management framework is aligned with the organization's strategic objectives and operational realities, thereby enabling effective identification and assessment of relevant risks. Explanation. Establishing the context, as defined in ISO 27005-2018, is a foundational step in the information security risk management process. It involves understanding the organizational environment, including its objectives, stakeholders, legal and regulatory requirements, and the scope of the information security risk assessment. This phase helps to define the boundaries and criteria for risk assessment and treatment. Specifically, it requires identifying the organizational context, which encompasses internal and external issues that affect how the organization manages information security. It also involves defining the scope of the information security risk management process, which sets the boundaries for the subsequent risk assessment activities. Furthermore, establishing the context includes defining the risk management framework, which outlines the policies, procedures, and responsibilities for managing information security risks. This also involves setting the risk acceptance criteria, which are the thresholds for determining whether a risk is acceptable. The process also necessitates understanding the organization's risk appetite and tolerance levels. For instance, a financial institution operating under stringent regulations like GDPR and PCI DSS will have a different risk context and acceptance criteria compared to a small nonprofit organization. The identification of relevant stakeholders and their expectations is also crucial, as their input can significantly influence the risk management approach.